So in this video I'm going to tackle one of the most common myths that you hear about capitalism, is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
The truth is that global inequality is tumbling. Yeah, the rich are getting richer, but the poor are getting richer faster. And what's driving that process? The market.
Unsurprisingly, it is merely more right-wing propaganda produced by Prager University, which, for the record, is not in any way a university.
We've actually got statistics to back that evidence. One can even look as far as, and will not exactly say that the United States is some example of a free market, but if you were to look at between 1975 and 1990, what was discovered, in fact it was 1991 shall I say, what was discovered was the poor, which was the bottom 20 percentile, had actually moved up the ladder. They increased in wages overall in that time period by more than $27,000 plus. Meanwhile, the rich had only increased in wages by $4,000 plus. So the rich had grew richer and the poor had grew richer faster. The problem with the argument that the critics had was they forget the very fact that the reason for why this was simply because in 1975 it's not the same bottom 20% as those in 1991. That's simply because over the space of a decade, the bottom 20 percentile, most of them moved up the ladder, and into the market comes a new bottom 20 percentile, and this is what happens. It's a cycle. It's not something fixed. In other words, it's not a case of here's the bottom 20 percentile in 1975 and therefore the bottom 20 percentile in 1991 is the exact same. That's complete opposite of the truth.
But let's see what's going to happen with this argument.
Look at the most basic measures: literacy, longevity, infant mortality, calorie intake, height. More and more people are being lifted out of poverty.
Okay, let's take a little bit of a detour here, and as you can probably guess from the fact that I'm an anarchist, I'm not the biggest fan of state socialism, and I would guess that neither is this guy, but here's some facts. In Cuba, illiteracy went down, and in the Soviet Union, life expectancy went up. So, have I just convinced this PragerU host to become a Marxist-Leninist?
No, you have not convinced anyone to become a Marxist-Leninist, because the real facts of the matter is, when you look at Cuba, Cuba's literacy rate was already high long before Fidel Castro stepped in 1959. In fact, from what statistics prove, is that in 1954, Cuba was spending 4.1% of GDP on education in that time period, which was actually a little more than what the United States of America were, far more than what the Western Europe was, and spending quite a percentage on education resulted in a high literacy rate within Cuba, and this existed before Fidel Castro stepped in. So the cause of the high literacy rate was not because of Fidel Castro's socialist Cuban regime. It was already present within Cuba before Fidel Castro took over. However, what resulted what we saw as a result of Fidel Castro's Cuban regime under socialism is the very fact he decimated their economy, and things went downhill with regards to their overall economy.
The truth is that global inequality is tumbling.
And at the same time,
the top 1% of people on the planet have half the wealth. Tumbling.
yeah, that half the world's wealth statistic held by 1%, that is true. And this does seem to me like a pretty big counterexample to the whole global inequality is tumbling thing, but to be fair, he does seem to acknowledge this fact. He just thinks that it's okay because capitalism helps all the other people so much that you can just ignore these super rich people because there's just so much money and so much resources flying everywhere. So we would assume, if this is correct, that as productivity goes up, that wages are going to go up and the money's going to help everyone, right? Not just the capitalists.
This is what I really don't understand. The fact that he pointed out that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting richer. So, with the poor getting richer, why is that such a concern, what the rich are earning? Why does that even matter? Why does it matter that 1% hold 50% of the wealth? Does that really matter? You see, this was the same problem within the Industrial Revolution. What we saw was the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting richer. But you were so concerned, so overly concerned about what the rich were earning. Just ignore the fact that your wealth across the poor people is improving year in, year out. So instead of acknowledging the fact that people are getting richer, you simply brush that aside as if it's not important, and you simply stare at what the rich are earning. What does it matter what another person earns? What does it matter if they are far wealthier than yourself? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if you're getting richer year in, year out, what does it matter?
The truth is, if you look at what actually has been happening in, for example, the US, as productivity increases, wages, once you adjust for inflation, stay pretty much stagnant. There is more and more technology and more capacity to produce economic goods and services in more efficient ways, but most of the benefits don't go to most of the people.
That's actually to blame on the fact that you interfered with the marketplace. You see, I don't think you understand. Free market money, that's right, free market money, that means capitalism. It means the free market. Free market money is money that's determined by the people. That's what free market money means. Do you not understand that, socialist? That's what free market money means. Now let me ask you this question. Was that fiat currency determined by the people of society? No. It wasn't, was it? No. No. Gold and silver was determined by the people. That's what was determined by the people. That's what we had. Now, you could go on a big tangent about how gold and silver apparently failed. Or, because I've seen these arguments before, where people say, oh, it was gold and silver that was cause of the Great Depression, which is nonsense, considering the fact that what the Federal Reserve did, using open market operations, it stripped basically the gold standard temporarily away, and through the printing of the fiat currency, it created inflation and then deflation. That's what led to the Great Depression, through the manipulation of interest rates and changing of reserve ratios. Could you explain to me what that has to do with a capitalist system? Do you not understand what a capitalist system is? A capitalist system means that interest rates are set freely in the marketplace by the laws of supply and demand. It means your ratio of money is set in freely in the marketplace. It means that your monetary system, what your money is determined freely by the people of society. In other words, you used to have gold and silver, and then you have the audacity to question why things are the way they are in the United States of America today. I'm not really surprised, given the fact the United States of America is living under corporatism. It's not living under a capitalist system. It's not living under a system where interest rates are set freely by the marketplace. Your interest rates are being determined by a central banking system. The key word there is central. Even the economy is more complex than what you believe it to be. Because then you have to take into consideration the welfare state, the increase from the immigration, things that suppress wages, things that cause trouble, such as, for example, in Great Britain, where we have the mass immigration problem. And through the mass immigration problem, it causes a suppression on wages. And it all relates down to this issue on the laws of supply and demand. And the lack of competition in the marketplace you can pretty much blame on the absence of the free market. So, there's the issue.
The most rapid falls in poverty are happening in countries that are joining the global trading system. Compare growth rates in free trading Colombia and protectionist Venezuela.
Damn, this guy really knows how to hit the weak points in my arguments. As somebody who's against capitalism in the state, I am a very big fan of Venezuela, which has capitalism as enforced by a state.
How did you even draw to that conclusion? That makes no rational sense. This is the same Venezuela who controls the economy through the government. Now, whether you like this fact or not, and I don't care if you like facts or not, because it's a fact. So it's not, we're not dealing with opinions. We've gone way past opinions, son. We're dealing with facts here. And the fact is, systems and ideologies can only fall under one of two things: individualism or collectivism. Now there's the beautiful thing. Why? Because no one who is rational-minded, no one in the right mind would attempt to put capitalism under collectivism. Now, across various sources, we can see that the word collectivism is synonymous to the word socialism. It's plastered everywhere. The evidence of it is plastered everywhere. You see, what collectivism simply means, and whether you like it or not, I don't care if you believe in workers' control over the means of production or not. I don't care about that. Collectivism in the real world always places the state, the government, as the main element of the economy. That's collectivism. That's the opposite of individualism. Now, I don't care whether you talk about how you support collectivism and that's not what you view collectivism as and all this nonsense. But any system, it doesn't matter what it is, any country that places the state as the central authority and controller and dictator of the economy is collectivist. That is not an opinion, that is a fact. That fact is backed by the definition of individualism. You cannot sit there and say that Venezuela is an individualist system. To do so is to remain in the state of ignorance. It's to remain in the state of complete stupidity. How the hell can you label Venezuela as something individualist when individualism by definition means that the economy is in the hands of the people individually, where they have 100% control over their own finances, they are independent from the government 100% financially. It means that they are free and economically independent from the state. That is individualism, and the role of the state under individualism is to serve and protect the individual's private property rights. Now, to sit there and say that Venezuela matches anything close to this definition is just laughable. Because, like I said, look across various sources. Doesn't come from me, it's just factual. Something that you don't like, that your type don't like. And I don't care if you don't like facts. I don't care if you don't like the truth. The truth is, the word collectivism, even by definition, as proven here, holds pretty much the same definition as socialism. In other words, both typically mean economic control and political centralisation, and both mean collective ownership or control over the means of production. That is the reason why, across umpteen sources, you will find the synonym for collectivism is socialism. Not just proven in this source, and 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 this source, across umpteen sources. The evidence is plastered everywhere of it. And do you want to know why that is? Let's just say you speak about socialism with regards to education, with regards to healthcare, or agriculture, or doesn't matter what the hell you're talking about. Socialism, by name, means you are socialising it. So in other words, for an example of socialism with regards to agriculture would be to take it out of private hands individually and to collectivise it. It means to make it communal. It means to make it universal. It means to bring it together in a collective group. It means to socialise it. To socialise something, meaning socialism, to socialise it is to centralise it, meaning to collectivise it. It's the same meaning. It's the same word. It's just, that's what it means by socialism. You cannot have socialism without political centralisation. That's what you're doing when you're socialising. When you socialise agriculture, you basically are collectivising it. That's political centralisation. What you believe in is an oxymoron. You believe in socialism, but at the same time you believe in something that contradicts socialism. That's why people who support libertarian socialism are oxymoronic. They're oxymoronic because they believe in something that cannot exist. You essentially, on one hand, try to argue in favour of socialism, but then you try to argue in favour of decentralisation. That in itself is an oxymoron. It defeats the entire meaning and purpose of communal ownership. So yes, when you talk about socialism, you're talking about political centralisation. So it does not make sense whatsoever what you're trying to say. And the reason for why I brought this issue up is because capitalism, whether you like it or not, is an individualist system, and that individualist system means that it's freedom of the economy from government intervention. How you drew to the conclusion that Venezuela, the same Venezuela that socialists for years on end boasted about, all of these socialists bummed off about how Venezuela was this democratic socialist paradise. No different to how they treated Cuba, but simply because Venezuela ended up in an absolute mess, you then live in denial and say, nope, that's not socialism, nope, that wasn't socialism, that was all capitalism's fault. Well, to say that that was all capitalism's fault is to say that it was the fault of individualism. Because that's what capitalism is. It's the freedom of the economy from government intervention. So how the hell can you say the freedom of government intervention was the fault of Venezuela? Venezuela is one of the most state-controlled economies on the face of the entire planet Earth. It is one of the most socialist economies the world has ever seen. No one in the right mind, no rational-minded person could sit and say that Venezuela, with all its socialist government price controls that caused the shortage problems, could sit there and say that that was the fault of capitalism. And yes, your socialist government price ceilings caused the shortage problems. Now I know for a fact that you are too infantile to even study the reason for why price ceilings cause shortages. You're far too infantile. You treat socialism like it's a religion, and that's pathetic. I'm not here to treat anything like a religion. I take things at face value. And if you were to study why price ceilings cause shortage problems, you would then comprehend the reason why Venezuela ended up with the blackouts that it did, and the shortages that it did. And those shortage problems occurred long before your argument about a fall of oil prices. So that whole argument goes flying out the window. The shortage problems were occurring way back in 2003. Never mind the drop of oil prices long after that. So, there is the problem with your entire argument. You don't even understand what capitalism is. You don't understand individualism. How the hell you drew to the conclusion that all of those government price controls and all the nationalisation that we saw under Hugo Chavez, how you drew to the conclusion that this state-command economy was something capitalist is just outrageously ignorant. It's the sort of argument you would get from a 12-year-old.
You remove barriers to trade, prices fall, your people no longer have to work every hour just to afford food and basic commodities. They have time to invent and make and buy and sell other things. The whole economy is stimulated, poverty falls.
And now this argument is turning towards quote-unquote free trade. And anytime an advocate of capitalism is throwing around the word free or freedom, there's probably something unpleasant getting swept under the rug. And what actually is happening with this free trade is poorer countries are forced to go along with what is desired by foreign capitalists, and the only people there who are really getting seriously benefited are local capitalists.
I really do not know where you get this information from, and you didn't even give any information at all to back that evidence up. You didn't. And if you're going to touch upon the African continent, the same African continent that's living under oppression, that's living under extreme corporatism, the same African continent that is rife with socialism, I wouldn't even waste your time. I mean, where can you point to me in the direction of a free market-based economy? Where can you point to me those countries that you say are so suffering? Because what you're talking about is not the true face of free trade. This reminds me of the European Union. This reminds me of what was going on with the North American attempt at this so-called free trade, and it wasn't free trade at all. It was only in the interests of big business, big corporations. That's not free trade. How can you have free trade that is only beneficial to one set group? That's not free trade. That's not the true face of what free trade is. And again, that's where your argument falls flat in its face.
Western corporations are plundering developing countries. The top 1% of people on the planet have half the wealth.
Wouldn't YouTube be more fun if we had this PragerU all the time?
Okay, you might say. So, maybe capitalism works, maybe people are better off.
Yeah, you're assuming I've been convinced on that point. I haven't.
But isn't there a cost? Doesn't it make us more materialistic? Doesn't it make us greedier?
Yes.
Well, if by greed you mean a desire for material wealth, that's part of the human condition. It's in our DNA.
Greed DNA. This may be one of the worst applications of the human nature argument for capitalism I have ever seen.
The unique quality of capitalism is that it structures the incentives so that the way to succeed, the way to be greedy if you insist on using that vocabulary, is to offer a service to the people around you.
PragerU is right that greedy behavior is often seen under capitalism, and the argument is that's just something built into human nature that you're stuck with, so why not channel it into something productive?
Could you please show to me what exactly your socialism has done throughout this entire world to be productive? Because if you're talking about the very Soviet Union that was being financed by the likes of Goldman Sachs for years, that's not being productive. That was an economy that overproduced waste, such as the overproduction of pelts, where consumers were not buying the goods, or the more than 3 pairs of shoes that they would produce in the late 1980s in the Soviet Union, where massive big long waiting lines occurred. And do you want to know why the massive big long waiting lines occurred? Because what the government produced did not match the tastes of the consumer. Again, overproducing and creating waste. Let's not forget all of the shortage problems that it was faced with as a result of the economic calculation problem and the knowledge problem. Typical of socialist countries, of course. But you talk about being productive. And you talk about greed, of course. As if to, snigger at the fact that human beings are naturally self-interested. That's rather quite interesting and rich of yourself to talk about how, people are so greedy. You ignored the fact that the poor are getting richer, didn't you? So in other words, instead of acknowledging the fact that the poor are getting richer, you wipe that aside like it doesn't exist, like it's not important, and because of your absolute greed, you could only concentrate on what the rich have. I personally don't give a damn. I don't care who holds more than me. I'm not interested in who is driving about in a Ferrari. I'm not interested in people who are driving about in big fancy cars and have mansions. Good for them. I'm only interested in what I'm doing with my own life. Why should I feel envy for what people have more than myself? I don't. But you, on the other hand, you can't handle it. You can't see green cheese without having a bit. You're the type of person who is greedy. You can't accept what you already have. And to say that, your life is just oh so terrible, why don't you go live in Venezuela then? Why don't you go live in North Korea then? And then come back and tell us how great your life was. Because I guarantee you would appreciate where you live.
I would assert that capitalism is not channeling greedy behavior into positive changes in the world. Rather, it's encouraging it in the first place.
Years ago, when we go back to the 1990s, people did not go around with mobile phone technology, right? It wasn't really that common. And along came all of these mobile phones. Some of them used to be bricks. I used to own a Nokia 3330, if I remember right. And I remember the old Nokia phones that we used to have, and you press the numbers, etc., etc., and you had the wee snake games, etc., etc. But most importantly, thanks to capitalism, what it did was it produced things like the iPhone. And the beauty of it was, it not only had all of your music that people benefit from, it not only had all of these wonderful applications such as the games, etc., and applications that benefit you from a daily life, whatever applications that you may use. It had things like a GPS system that enabled you to do away with your maps. The paper that used to open up in a car? You now have GPS within your mobile phone to give you directions. That has greatly benefited a great many people. But instead of acknowledging the simple creation, the innovation, to ignore that capitalism made this possible, and whilst having the ability to, use GPS, use the internet on it to communicate, to do many other things, and use all these fancy applications. You can also take pictures. You can also record video. All from the hands of one device with touchscreen technology. That's what capitalism provided. Now, if you were to go to life before then, because trust me, I am probably a lot older than yourself to remember those days. If we were to go back to a time period before then, to say that the mobile phone technology with the touchscreen technology and all of those things, to say that that did not benefit us, to say that that did not better our life in terms of our living standards, is nothing short of crap.